Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. You probably can't see this very well because I'm in the car. I've got all the lights on, but of course I'll put that one on as well. It's obviously it's quite gloomy because it's just gone 10 o'clock. It's just getting dark. It's just dusk has come in. 20 past 10. And yep, it's Friday night. I'm heading off to see Doctor Who, the season finale. Last week's episode, The Legend of Ruby Sunday, and the finale, Empire of Death, which broadcasts on BBC One tomorrow. By the time you're seeing this video, you'll have seen it. So I'm going to head off now. It's just on 20 past 10. The cinema's just 10 minutes away. I've pre-ordered a large latte to take in to the cinema from McDonald's. Other fast food hot drink dispensing places are available, but not this time of night. So I'm going to grab my coffee, head in to see the film. I don't know what the score is. I know they tell everybody to be in by 1:45 if possible. There's no ads or anything, or trailers, obviously, because it's a TV presentation. I don't know if there's going to be any freebies, posters or anything. I doubt it, but it'd be interesting to see how many people turn up, bearing in mind the alleged unpopularity of Doctor Who at the moment. So, yeah, I better get a move on. I'll try and get some footage when I'm there of seeing what's going on. If not, I'll see you after this lot for a bit of a chat. Welcome back. Well, it is the next day. It's Saturday afternoon and time to reflect upon the Empire of Death, the finale of this new season of Doctor Who. First thing I want to say is to talk briefly about the cinema experience last night. It was a really interesting experience. I knew, having looked online, that it seemed to have sold a few tickets, but I wasn't expecting quite as many people to turn up for the screening as there actually were at my local View cinema. It was one of the smaller screens, 150 seats. I reckon 100, 110 or so were probably occupied. And you could tell that because the front row seats, as always, are unoccupied. And looking back, there were a few seats dotted about here and there. It was very, very well attended. I was very impressed. And it gave me similar vibes, as did the episode, of course, to seeing Avengers Endgame a few years ago. That double screening where they screened Infinity War, and then at midnight or a minute after midnight they went on to show Avengers Endgame. It was a similar buzz. We didn't have the people in costumes that we had when I went to see Avengers Endgame, but there was a similar buzz about a big story that was building and coming to its epic conclusion. And on a smaller scale, because of course Doctor Who isn't quite Marvel, it felt much the same. There was a buzz from the audience waiting for the episode to start. It felt like an event, which is why I'm glad I went, because it was an event. There were no freebies, unfortunately. There were no posters or badges or anything. You just went in and you went out. But seeing the episodes on the screen, the big screen, it really opened them up. You could really actually see that Disney money on screen and the excellent sound mixing, and it just looked great. And I was sort of worried that even though the effects in Doctor Who were good, is the big screen going to diminish them? But no, both episodes looked astonishing. They really did look brilliant. And in the gap between the first episode and the second, there was a 15-minute gap. There was a countdown leading to a special message before Empire of Death. And it was just a very brief, fleeting 30 seconds or so of Millie Gibson thanking everybody for coming out to watch the episode and thanking everybody for watching the series. On which point, I think I would have to say that judging by the attendance at the screen that I went to, I suspect that Doctor Who's viewing figures aren't exactly what the viewing figures tell us they are. The thing about viewing figures is they are an approximation. They're based on people who have set-top boxes attached to their TVs across the country, and then the company that puts together the figures extrapolate from that the potential number of people actually watching something. And as I've said, I think I said in a previous video, it could well be that everybody in the country is watching Doctor Who, but set-top boxes don't necessarily reflect that. I do suspect that Doctor Who still has a very broad and enthusiastic viewership, certainly in excess of official numbers that we get, which are an approximation. But certainly the audience that I saw this with last night were enthusiastic. They weren't whooping and cheering and going crazy, but they had come out at 11 o'clock in the night to see 2 Doctor Who episodes, and that's means something. And there were no kids, they were all older people. So I don't know what we can take from that. It's just that I think Doctor Who is probably more popular than the viewing figures might suggest. Right, can't delay the moment any longer. Let's talk about the episode. Following on from the shock revelation, the return of Sutekh at the end of last week's episode, we find the Doctor on the back foot. I'm not going to talk a lot about the plot, not because of spoilers, but because this is an episode that you enjoy for certain reasons. I thought it was a great episode. I really enjoyed it. And this is an episode that is going to be very divisive. All Doctor Who is divisive, as we know. Fans have their extreme opinions, and there are some extreme fans with extreme opinions. But this is an episode that's going to wind a lot of people up, because it was very, very much a Russell T Davies series finale in the old style. It reminded me of Series 3, The Last of the Time Lords, which predicated upon a storyline whereby Earth had been invaded by an alien race called the Toclophane that the Master had led to Earth. Humanity was wiped out and became slaves, and by contrivance at the end of the plot, time was reversed, so it never happened and nobody had any memory of it. This is something which Russell has done in various degrees in different episodes throughout his time with Doctor Who. Donna forgetting her time with the Doctor. And I think in some ways it's a shame that he fell back on that trope, because once you see characters, popular, regular characters dying, as we saw in the first 5 or 10 minutes of this episode, we saw Kate Lethbridge-Stewart die. We saw Lenny Rush's character, Maurice Gibbons, die. We saw Rose Noble die. We saw Colonel Ibrahim die. We saw Sherry Sunday die. We saw Carla Sunday die. We saw Mrs. Flood die. We saw them all turn to dust by Sutekh's dust of death. But at that point in the story, you think, well, these people aren't all going to stay dead, are they? They're going to be brought back somehow. So it detracts from the stakes of the episode from the very beginning, because you're presented with something happening that you know is not final. And in that regard, it does reflect Marvel's Infinity War and Endgame, with the blip where we saw Thanos reducing half the universe's population to dust. And it's hard to see how Russell wasn't influenced by Slash completely stealing that, because that was just a total, I'm going to say rip-off. It was a total rip-off of the events of Infinity War Endgame, with similar consequences, because we knew half the population in the universe weren't going to stay dead. But the interest was, how is it going to be reversed? Of course, we knew that time travel was going to be involved, because it was the only way it could be. So we start off an episode with a massive threat, which is wiping out all life in the universe with this dust of death. It is, in some ways, so high stakes, too high stakes, that if you destroy the universe, that's the end of everything. It's going to have to be reversed somehow. So I think it lessens the dramatic impact, I think, by having it so huge. I mean, this is something that Sutekh always wanted anyway in Pyramids of Mars. It was always, as a god of death, that he wanted to spread out across the universe and destroy everything. But I think it does put you on the back foot slightly when major characters die. You know they're not going to stay dead. So knowing that, you know that whatever's going to happen down through the episode, there are going to be no real consequences, because that's going to be reversed somehow. Beyond that, the things I enjoyed most in the episode were the emotional moments, because once again, this wasn't a particularly action-packed episode. It wasn't quite as chamber-piecey as the last episode, which was very much people explaining what was going on and putting the characters into certain positions for the denouement. But this was very much, again, an episode with people reflecting upon things that have happened and the Doctor trying to find a solution. There was a pace to the whole episode, but the only action scene is the Doctor and Mel fleeing through London / Cardiff, with the smoke rolling through the city, wiping people out. Very dramatic, looked very good, looked, a big scene for Doctor Who. But again, it was a scene that was the only scene that we had that showed us what was happening on the Earth. And we've had this previously, I think, in the Giggle. I'm just talking fairly recently, where the world was falling to chaos because of the effect of the Giggle, and we only saw one street riot, sort of suggesting that. And again, in this episode, Doctor Who's got a bigger budget, of course, but they're not going to be able to afford lavish scenes set all over the world, showing the chaos going on all over the world. But you want to see a bit more. If the world's being wiped out, you need to see it a bit more than just one scene on the streets of Cardiff. A minor quibble, but this is the problem when a story exceeds the reach of the production. You're telling a story that you can't really show, and it's a shame. But no, the things that I liked about this episode most were the emotional beats, those quiet moments of reflection and contemplation. When the Doctor in the TARDIS, the memory TARDIS, with Mel and Ruby, is looking out across the world being destroyed, and he's reflecting that he's caused this because of the consequence of the character of Susan, who is a construct of Sutekh. Sutekh, as we learned from the rather convoluted storyline, hitched a ride aboard the TARDIS after Pyramids of Mars, and he's been hitched aboard the TARDIS ever since. He has soaked up all the knowledge of the TARDIS and used that knowledge to create a figment of Susan. Everywhere the Doctor's gone, it's created this figure that the Doctor's perhaps not always been aware of, but he seeded a version of this person everywhere the Doctor's been, ready for his moment of apotheosis, when he could spread his dust of death across the universe. It is typically massive, outrageous Russell T Davies storylining and plotting. Very arcane, very hard to get a grip on, because it is so extraordinary and so full of ideas. And I say what you like about Russell T Davies, he's full of ideas. Not all of them work the way they should, not all of them explain the way they should. I think there's lots of things here that could have been explained better. But I think you can't fault him for his ambition. But I sort of feel that Doctor Who perhaps works best when it's not being this big. Much as I enjoyed this episode, I think the episodes that will probably live longer with me will be things like 43 Yards, Devil's Cord, Dot and Bubble. It's more intimate stories. When Doctor Who goes really big, and I think when Russell's doing it particularly, he writes off the page so that everything is there. And there was a lot of really good stuff in this episode, and I'm not saying I didn't like this episode. I liked it a lot, as you'll see when I rate it. But you can't get away from the sense that it was all over the place, really. And there were pacing issues where you had big excitement and then lulls for quite a while as the consequences of what's happened sink in. The Doctor realises that what's happened, the Sutekh aboard the TARDIS, has wreaked all this devastation upon the universe, and the Doctor blames himself. Great acting moments for Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson, and also Bonnie Langford, who was excellent in scenes later on where she was possessed by Sutekh. I also like the scene where the Doctor's on the alien planet talking to the last survivor of this race, or whatever this planet was, who has lost her memories, she's lost everything. Her past is being eaten away by the dust. Again, that seemed like an idea that was sort of almost added on as if an extra scene to give an extra dimension to what Sutekh was doing. It wasn't just that he was wiping people out. He was wiping out their pasts and all their memories and everything that came to make people what they were wiped out. The resolution was batshit crazy. Let's just admit that. People always accuse Russell Davies of Deus Ex Machina, things coming out of nowhere to solve the problem, and I think there was a bit of that here. Something in the memory TARDIS, a bit of supernatural rope that was used to harness Sutekh, to drag him into the time vortex where the Doctor became death himself, having forced death to become life and thus undoing everything that had happened. The Doctor himself had to become death to destroy Sutekh. A nice piece of acting from Ncuti again here, expressing his disgust at having to do this, but if you stop and think about it, the Doctor's killed before many times. There are so many Doctor Who stories where things have been blown up. Even the original Pyramids of Mars, he theoretically pushed Sutekh beyond his point of existence, so he died. So the Doctor's really no stranger to killing. And I think that his reaction to becoming death to kill death seemed a bit extreme, bearing in mind the things he's had to do in the past. But I think it's an example of Russell putting new touchy-feely emotion on the Doctor. He has to feel guilty for the things that he does. One of the other things I think this episode did is explain a bit more about why the Doctor's always crying, because he is now more in touch with himself. He's more aware of himself. We had the scene towards the end where he says to Ruby that she has made him more conscious of family and more conscious of humanity and his humanity. I think that came across quite well. I mean, he certainly blubbed quite a bit in this episode. And I think that is something which has become a bit wearing, but it's clearly something that's going to be happening going forward, because Russell T Davies has said he wants to make the Doctor a little bit more identifiable to a younger audience by making him a bit more open and a bit more in touch with his emotions. How you feel about that is how you feel about that. As far as I'm concerned, the Doctor is an alien. He's usually above those sorts of things. But hey, new era Doctor Who, 21st century, things have changed. Things have been changing since the show came back. It's just another change to the Doctor's character. This Doctor is an emotional beast. The series has focused very much on a number of mysteries. As we know, the mystery of Ruby Sunday's parentage and why she's a foundling. The strange groaning noises the TARDIS has been making occasionally. Well, that was Sutekh. Who is Mrs. Flood? Played by Anita Dobson. We still don't know. And, of course, the mystery of Susan Triad. That, of course, is resolved. We know that she has been constructs of Sutekh all these years. Going to the core mystery of Ruby, the problem I have with all of that and the whole Doctor-Ruby relationship is we've only had 8 episodes this year. 2 of them, the Doctor was hardly in. 1 of them, Millie was hardly in, or Ruby was hardly in. So we haven't had time to dig into this mystery. Having all these mysteries ladled upon a reduced number of episodes has inevitably bogged the episodes down a bit, because these things are in the back of our minds. You know, Susan Twist has turned up in every episode. Who is she? What is she? And that, I think, has perhaps overshadowed the stories themselves. We've only had 8 episodes, 9 including the Christmas episode. Hasn't given us time to get used to the Doctor and Ruby being together, and I'll come to that again in a moment. But I think there's just been too many questions. We could have just stuck with the foundling thing. But that's not Russell's way. He wants to see things more going forward. We're going to see Mrs. Flood in the next season. A couple of things have been resolved. 1 or 2 maybe haven't been. Ruby has left the TARDIS. She's reunited with her mother and she's gone. Of course, she's not gone. She's back next year. Now, I really admired the bravery of building up this mystery of who Ruby's mother is and who Ruby is. I was sort of fearing another Impossible Girl scenario of Clara and myth of Amy Pond that built up. And it turns out that Ruby Sunday is just an ordinary girl. Her mother was just an ordinary girl. She was a 15-year-old girl who got pregnant by a 15-year-old boy. She had a troubled family life, and she did the best she could for the child by leaving it on a church. And she isn't a magic character. She's not a Time Lord. She's not the monk. She's not the Rani. She's not Susan. And I admire that. But I noticed that it has led to some people being disappointed because they wanted something more. They wanted a bigger mystery. They wanted a bigger reveal. But I think it was bold and brave to say, no, she's just an ordinary girl. Because as the Doctor said in the episode, being ordinary is the secret sometimes. Being ordinary is what makes some people special. And being ordinary was what saved the universe in this case, because as unlikely as it might seem, it was Sutekh's curiosity as to this mystery in Ruby that led to his defeat. And I think it was a very brave thing to do, a very brave decision. The last 10 minutes of the episode, I think, was scintillating as human drama. That's what Russell does so well. The science fiction stuff and all the monsters and mysteries and stuff, that's all well and good. But Russell T Davies is a writer who writes about people, which is one of the reasons that, nice as it is to have him back on Doctor Who, I miss his voice in domestic contemporary dramas. It's a Sin, Very English Scandal, Years and Years. He nails the way that people speak today and the issues that concern them today. In those last 10 minutes where the Doctor takes Ruby to see her mother, advises her not to get to know her, but Ruby does it anyway. which of course leads to the Doctor and Ruby splitting up, because the Doctor realises that Ruby has a new adventure now with a new family, her found family, and that she has to move on. Of course, she'll be back. But as Russell T Davies said in the episode of Unleashed I just watched, she's doing what you do in these circumstances. The story is pausing. She's leaving the Doctor. The Doctor's coming back because he said so. So she's spending time with her family as she would. You would. I think if as a 20-year-old girl, you've just been reunited with your mother, you've got a chance of meeting your father. Oh, nice to see you. I'm just off with the Doctor in the TARDIS for a bit. You're not really going to do that. So I think it's a realistic decision for her to make, to leave the TARDIS at this point. But we know she'll be back. So I love those last 10 minutes because you get tuned in to the emotions of the characters, and especially Ruby. And I think that the downbeat reveal of the mother was a masterstroke. The only effective way of doing it, I've read all the theories about the Valiard, it's the monk, it's the Rani, it's the master. No, it's just a scared 15-year-old girl. And I think that's a really nice payoff. But I understand that some fans will be disappointed because they've sort of missed the subtlety of that. I really liked this episode. I had a blast watching it at the cinema. It looked great. It's a rattlingly good story, but it does all those things that Russell T Davies does that annoy a lot of people. These random bits of obscure storytelling that he just plucks out of thin air, weaves it all together, and it works, but it is slightly shonky, and it is slightly shambolic, and it is unsatisfying for some people. Some people who just want a straightforward adventure story where the Doctor's fighting a baddie and finds a way to beat them. This has such high stakes, it's almost impossible to comprehend those stakes because it's the universe. And I think once you destroy the universe, you put it out of perspective in a way because it's too much to get your head round. And as I've said a couple of times, you know that the universe is going to be saved and things are going to be reversed. And that always feels like a cop-out, no matter how cleverly it's done. And it was cleverly enough done here. But he's done this before. But it didn't necessarily detract from what I thought was a sparklingly entertaining final episode of this season. And as a result of that, I'm going to give it, as with last week's episode, a 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10. I was hoping possibly for a 10. And in fact, when I saw it, I thought, yeah, it's a 10 out of 10 episode. But I hate the expression, I've got to process this, got to process it. Because I just think, get on with it. But I did have to process this episode when I came home last night. It was spinning around in my head and thinking about certain things. And there are certain things now which I don't understand. I still don't really understand the significance of Ruby being able to materialise snow. Presumably some sort of link back to her memory of being a baby. I don't really know. So I did enjoy it, but I fully understand people who didn't like it or didn't understand it or felt it was a disappointment. I got what I wanted from this, which was 55 minutes of thrilling, compelling, colourful, beautifully made Doctor Who. But I do think Doctor Who is better when it's not reaching for the universe. I think Doctor Who is better when it's doing things like 43 Yards and Dot and Bubble, when the threat is more intimate, where the threat is more confined, where the threat doesn't involve the future of the universe, because that's just too big. But it was a good ending to a good series. Tell me what you thought of the episode. I know this review's been slightly shambolic, but it's an episode with so much going on that you have to pluck out the things that you liked and concentrate on the things that you think maybe didn't work. Because I don't think it worked as a story in itself, because it was too many random things thrown into the mix, which made it feel a bit inconsistent. But as I've said, I got a buzz out of it. It was a thrill ride. And I give it 9 out of 10 for that. So anyway, let me know what you thought of the episode. Leave a comment down below. As usual, please be civil. Please be constructive. I'm not going to moderate the comments this time, but I will obviously delete anything which I think is stupid and petulant. Any of the Doctor Who RIP type things are going to go. So don't waste your time. But if you've got anything to add to this mix about this story, because it's a story for the ages that's going to confuse and confound and annoy people for the ages. So anyway, let me know what you thought about it, negative or positive, but in a constructive manner. That's the end of Doctor Who for now, but not the end of Doctor Who on this channel, because I will be doing my ranking video, ranking the episodes of this season, including Church on Ruby Road, because I do count it as part of the season, particularly now it's part of Ruby's sort of arc. And then I'll be doing an overview of the whole season, and then I'm going to be doing a where next for Doctor Who, what is the future for Doctor Who, and I will be taking into account things like viewing figures and responses, general responses, and where the show is in the current cultural landscape. Right, thank you for watching. I will leave you for now. I will see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.